All right, let me do maybe just a drive-by so you kind of get a feel for, what the software is. I hope still up and running, but shouldn't be a problem. So this is one thing that you'll also see a lot in terms of data protection in general. We are following pretty much the same standards. We call it the common look and feel. So we don't want, when you interact with our software, whether it's Networker or Cyber Recovery or ECDM, to have to learn a new GUI. When I say a new GUI, it's just the general layout, because that can be annoying. So we're really working very hard to standardize the user experience, but then also we put the user UX really front and center. Because one approach could have been, well, I'm just going to make this look like DPC or pick one. And then what you lose is the unique workflow. We need to design this really for what we're trying to do here. So this is what we've done. We were one of the first projects that worked with our UX team, who are fabulous. And it was a lot of getting early customer feedback as part of the agile development lifecycle to make sure that what we design is not just HTML5 and then it really is not great from a user experience, but it's user experience first and then of course has the modern technologies, right? And that's kind of just something that you should know in general from a data protection perspective. Okay. Highly secure password here. Okay, so when you dial in, or log in, essentially, you're going to right away find this dashboard. So the purpose of the dashboard is kind of what I just talked about, is easy access to critical information. We're not going to tell you, oh yeah, this job went just great, and you're going to see a lot of greens here. Because we're in a vault, I don't care. Ideally, I just want to leave it alone. Of course, run periodic recovery drills, right? But, I really want to rely on automation. I don't want to do command line, and I don't want to do too much work. So a lot of this will only be yellows or reds. In other words, there will be a warning if there is something that's unusual, and if there's something that is really worth looking at, it will be critical. For example, if I do a scan using index engines, right, and I find that there is an issue, something indicates or is indicative of a cyber attack, you'll get a critical. And then I'll click on it, and then I'll be able to have more information. That link that I just talked about, locked, means the link is dark, right? So we did the if config, it's dark. It will turn the other way when it's taking in. So right away, if you think about it, for scripts, it's very hard to get this type of information. Right here, you have it in one click. You see this little panic button. So if there's a lockdown, typically in an incident response, part of the activity is to protect your network. We would basically be able to force, that bringing the link offline and protect your crown jewels, right? So 4 tiles. It's a little bit hard to see here. And we'll get back to it in a minute. But first, when you get in there and you deploy the software, the first thing you would probably do is you would get through the getting started. And so this is a really nice layout because immediately, Karel, your question, what's supported? Well, guess what? I go here. Here it is, right there. And so when you're not as familiar with this product as maybe some of us are, this can be very helpful and to keep you out of trouble, right? So it kind of gives you the right checklist. Of course, we have documentation, like always. And then the next thing you would do is you would add users, okay? So I would add Stephen Fosgood as an example. What's your password? No, so basically, you... He doesn't want to give it to me. Give the users with the right credentials. So this is my user management. I can get some of these tasks out of the way, and I can always go back. Vault storage. Well, that's obviously the data domain that I have. So if I need a host name here, clearly. So I need this information. I don't have it, but this is where I would enter it. Provide the login credentials. I can actually make use of these tags, which is very nice. So something becomes a little bit more searchable. So if this is our Tech Field Day data center, I can add this in, and now essentially this content or these types of objects become searchable within the GUI, which is of course really helpful. And then you create policies, and we'll talk about the policies, but think of policies essentially as that grouping of objects, right? So we have 2 data domains, and then the logical objects are those 2 M trees that I want to replicate. There may be an application involved, like index engines. Those are my objects, and then I need to tell it, what do you want me to do? Those are the jobs. That's essentially what we put into policies. Very consistent, I think, with backup policies. And you can see it kind of gives me error messages on the fly. So because I didn't specify a context here, well, I'm not going to be able to create a policy. So that is a prerequisite. So there's some work that needs to be done during the implementation or the deployment phase in order to make sure that I can create the policy for obvious reasons. But if I had it, I would basically do it here. And then I would pretty much be off to the races. So we go back to the dashboard. So in this case, we have these tiles. Everything's hyperlinked. So I could just say, yeah, you know what, I want to see them all. And you can immediately see all the warnings with a security category distinction. And again, if you have to pull this information from different tools, or you have a script-based solution, that becomes a lot harder to do this. I can add other alerts. Storage, system related, oh, look, there's something that happened here. Or I can say, give me just the critical ones. I don't have time. And then it would essentially be able to give you this key information. It was unable to initiate a data domain synchronization because it probably didn't have a data domain to talk to, kind of thing. Or you didn't use the right credentials. So it's a very nice way to find critical information quite rapidly. And this is going to be the layout that you're going to see pretty much throughout the products, right? This is very standard. So again, once you learn how to navigate this in general, you're going to be able to navigate through this for other use cases, for other deployments as well. I can acknowledge. I can acknowledge multiple. Yep, got it. I can add a note. And it said, yes, I just logged in. It's secure, it's fine. So, a lot of, sort of flexibility here. Events, of course, this is something that we would feed out, to your point, outside of the vault, critical information for support purposes, for purpose of exposing what index engines puts out. I mean, this is how this link would be used, right? Give me some key information. What's nice here is I can essentially also search. If I want to have everything that's relevant, all the alerts that are relevant for synchronization, I can type in the first characters and it will sort it accordingly. If I want to find all the ones that are relevant for a sandbox, same kind of idea, right? So just, again, a nice way to find critical information quickly.
With regards to the analytics or the identification of threats of compromised data or whatnot, is it only for file data? Or is
No. Yeah. This is where Jim is going to talk about, but I want to give you an answer now, right? So index engines, what's cool about index engines, they reverse engineered common backup catalogs. So TSM, NetBackup, Networker, Avamar, but also File, right? So there's a broad ecosystem that essentially when index engines comes into your raw backup, whether it's on tape or an M tree, doesn't matter, raw tarball, right? They can actually see the files inside because they have that understanding of what a backup catalog looks like.
Database backups?
We can look inside databases too.
Okay.
Yes.
But if you have an encrypted VMDK, for example, it can't just browse inside the VMDK content? You would never know that?
Our intellectual property is the ability to get inside those complex formats and understand the data that's in there. So VMDK backup images, yes, Commvault, TSM, so to get in there and look at the data. And we look at the unstructured files as well as the databases. So encryption of a page of a database, for example.
Right.
But encrypted backups. But
so it's encrypted backup. It depends on how it's encrypted. So we would need to coordinate with the encryption device to be able to manage that. We're not a hacking tool. We can't hack into that stuff. But as long as we can coordinate, as long as we can coordinate with that encryption process, we should be okay. So.
But the KMS server is probably assumed to be compromised at this stage, which will be in the prod side or the passive side. So in an encrypted VMDK scenario, would you identify that as a compromised VMDK? Or would you not?
Yeah, if you had a before and after image and you saw that change, then yes. So it could also be benign. Somebody just turned on legitimate encryption, right? And then you would be able to.
No, I'm talking more like PETIA type of malicious encryption of a VMDK file. So you will actually look inside the VMDK file.
We can see corruption. If there's a corruption of a backup image, we would see that. That would show up.
But not the not encryption, without the KMS, access to the KMS?
I don't know. I can get the answer to that one
Okay.
for you. So.
Where does that processing run? Is it on the data domain?
Yeah, let me talk about that. It does not run on the data domain. Neither does Cyber Recovery. So the software runs on a separate box, Linux server. Like I just said, that's where we deploy. This process probably is best suited for something like a VxRail, like a vSAN, right? Something hyper-converged, because you're going to need compute and you're going to need storage, right, in order to sort of do the scanning. And the other reason why it's probably not a good idea to run on the data domain is typically separation of duties, right? You have, sort of a frame that's responsible for holding your gold copies, right? Your protected copies. And then you want to do any analytics works typically on another footprint.
So you have an air-gapped data domain for the vault.
Yeah.
And then you have the index engine running on some type of compute, hyperconverged, what
Correct.
have you. But it's all kind of in that.
Still in the vault.
It's in the vault. It's in the vault, but it's sort of a separate sort of VLAN partitioned part of the network. Yeah.
Surely would a better architecture not be involved in not having to make the customer buy yet another data domain box and keep it on a secure enclave or a VLAN partition where the primary backup resides and run it on there? It's an expensive solution otherwise.
Yeah, no, it is. This is, it all depends, right? So when you do what you're saying, that is, we have this continuum. It's good, better, best, right? From a cyber resiliency perspective, this is probably a very good approach. And this is anyway, because sometimes we see customers, you don't want to buy a third data domain, put it in a cyber recovery vault, and then be on Windows XP. I mean, so there's basic housekeeping, and you got to make sure you have separation, and then use features, and we don't often see that. So if you feel that you have adequate protection, right, by running and applying retention log in production, then sure, then have the VLAN tagging and do the separation of duties to do your analytics. That can be a very viable approach, but it's still going to be on the network. And therefore, it's
So
still...
is this arguably?
No.
Well, if you're taking it off of the management path, the only link you have is the replication link, right? So you would have to exploit that, which is a lot harder to do. So we raise the bar, right? This is not on, it is on the management path inside that private network of the Cyber Recovery Vault, but it's kind of like only 3 people have access to that.
Yeah, but you can achieve the same using better architecture on-prem, on the primary side, surely through not having the network
Yeah, this is
connectivity.
not meaning that you have to have a separate data center, right? I mean,
Or
so-
separate data domain.
So you can just, exactly, you need to have that separate footprint, however you define that. And then if that's, I mean, when you look at the picture, it can be deceiving. It means like, oh my God, I have to build another data center. That's not what we're advocating.
No, my point is, why is it that you have to have a secondary data domain when you could have put the primary data domain inside a better architected
You're saying vault to
environment?
primary.
Yeah, vault to the primary. And then run it on primary itself, so customers don't have to spend money on buying yet another data domain.
Well, if you have a data domain that is full, you need a second data domain anyway.
Or-
So if you are using it for the primary backup, you don't want to mess up with your primary
Right.
backup, I think.
It's a
I don't know.
backup. Why
We
would
get conflicting goals because the problem is your data domain that you have in production, you're going to have to connect to something that pushes the data mover that pushes the data. And you have to have sort of that management path, right? So yes, you can do logical separation, if you will, and then harden and sort of reduce your surface of attack that way, but you still have those paths, right? If you want to get the benefit of removing those attack vectors, then you need to think about a way to minimize, the access points and then essentially replicating into a third. And so then while that is an additional expense, a lot of the security-minded folks we talk to are okay with that investment, knowing that my attack vector just was reduced in this scenario by maybe 3 access points or attack vectors. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot we should do today in our production environment. And we always advocate this. We have security guides. And then to the level they are implemented and follow, that's a separate conversation, right? I mean, you got to be pragmatic and then, make it still practical to engage with these systems so people dial into that sort of level that they're comfortable with. This just gives you the sort of the smallest, possible attack vector that we know of, and then it really just becomes a risk investment conversation, right?
Thank you.
So this is essentially scanning your primary backup data to check and use the analytics to see if there are any attacks or anything that looks different than it was or should be.
Yes.
So if you're an organization that backs up, only once every 24 hours or something like that, then potentially you could have an attack or some kind of change and you wouldn't know about it for a while. Is that one of the recommendations that you have using this product, kind of changing the way you do backups to make it quicker to expose an attack?
Not necessarily, because we don't want to get into sort of the world of sort of the detection tools, right? That's all about detect as fast as possible. The way I look at the analytics specific to this use case, it's more about make it easier for me to identify if there's a problem with the quality of my backup, right? And then the use case and if you will, the benefit is I'm just going to forego and be a little bit more proactive about all the work I would have to do anyway should I ever have to recover. It's not meant to be, oh, I'm going to find this and then, therefore I have to take it in more often because, we may lose 24 hours of dwell time. It's more about let the security vendors, including RSA and SecureWorks, worry about the dwell time. Let us worry about how can we take time out of that recovery process,
Sure.
if that makes sense. So it's more about just using the analytics selfishly to say, yeah, I don't want to wait for this phone call. I want to be able to kind of start the work. And if I have to rule out a false positive, great. But I don't want that, sort of surprise in the end. It's more about a quality verdict, if you will, on the backup copy versus trying to find detailed sort of indicators of compromise and the malware and then becoming another endpoint.
Are you scanning the primary backup or the vaulted backup?
Vault. There's that conversation as
So
well.
the index engine has to run in an environment against the vault.
Yes.
So if you run that on like a VxRail or some type of hyperconverged component, you still got to manage and maintain all of that threat vector as well. I mean, you got to patch the thing, you got to update it, you got to do all of those pieces. So back to the architecture kind of conversation, so you're going to put this new kit in to run the index engine, which is part of the value prop here, but you got to maintain the security of the environment that's running the engine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which you would have to do regardless of where you put it, right? You have a new infrastructure that has a new sort of exciting capability that you may or may not value, but I think it's exciting. You can look at rest, right? But you're going to have to make the investment in the hyperconverge, and then obviously you need to be on top of it from a patch management and maintenance. You're absolutely right. Oops, logged me out.
And do you have any plans to kind of have, because real value add here is the index engine capabilities from what I'm seeing anyway. Are there any plans to kind of have that available on a cloud platform so you don't have to buy yet more tin?
Yeah, I mean, the deployment we're talking here is in the vault. So we can run out on the primary data domain as well. We can run on network storage. We can run in a cloud environment as well. So, yeah. So that is available.
Cool. And you don't have this as a SaaS? It's just...
We have partners that we're talking to that are providing, cyber as a service. So, yes.
Cool.
Yeah,
EMC comes to mind. Potential good fit.
There's a lot.
Yeah, it makes complete sense because it might lower the barrier to entry for a lot of our customers. That's excellent feedback. We hear that. And there's nothing really technically from gating us from using, a DDVE instance, for example, that's sitting in the Amazon. You get the idea. This software could run there, right? So that's kind of how we architect it, right, with that in mind. So when you then go to assets, this is basically what we have already talked about. So this is where I would add my data domain or my footprint. Of course, I can edit it, and do my thing. Same for applications. This is where I would add sort of index engines. So this is all just like inputs that I would then later encapsulate in my policies. When I go to policies, this is essentially where, I create my objects. So I would give it a name. I would have to, identify the storage, the context, that's that logical grouping. And, as you can see, there's no replication context. We ran into this earlier in the setup wizard, but essentially we, of course, need that work to be done. But once that's there, I can go about setting up my policy. So that's a one-time task, right? And then I can create policies. And, this is what I talked about. We have the retention type, governance, compliance, one being more strict compliance, that is, two-person authentication. So we're making it even harder for doing any type of destruction, if you will, on the target data domain. Even though we already kind of, we reduced the attack surface dramatically. But see, now we have the ability to reduce it even more so that you're really down to physical destruction or something crazy in order to take this infrastructure out. This interesting here, you can specify the replication window. This goes to your point. Let's assume you do once daily. If I, having done this now for a month, know that I'm about 4 hours for intake, this can be useful because if it takes 5, there may be an indicator that I'm pulling in more data and maybe there was something encrypted. These are rates of change-based tests that could be useful for identifying an issue. It could also just mean that maybe Jim put something in the M tree that I didn't want. Either way, it's helpful. We're not going to shut down the replication, but we're certainly going to get an alert, and so it's useful information. And then, of course, I can specify my replication or my retention duration. So this is where I specify, I'm going to keep these copies around for, let's say, 40 days. I have archival solutions for the archive use cases. This is about sort of operational recovery. And then, when I know what the objects are, so to speak, and the parameters, what I then do is I run an action. And I would essentially go in there and say secure copy. So secure copy essentially is on that previous image, that's step 1, 2, 3. The outcome will be I will have a retention locked copy in on my data domain in the vault. And it will expire after 30 days. That's what I'm telling it to do. And when I hit apply, guess what? It's going to run this job. And then if this all goes well, and after this refreshes, the vault is now open. So immediately I can see I'm taking in data. Arguably, my attack surface is slightly, increased. This will close when the replication is over. Now, I can see that here in this little wheel. There were quite a few successful jobs. One is running, so let's take a look. And then essentially, I'm just going to cancel it. I don't want to put it in, but, it'll confirm. It will take a while now to go close again because it has to go through the procedure of securely, terminating this job. But that's essentially what we've done. Now, what's cool here also is that I can schedule this. So the last thing I want to do is, just do this manually all the time. So I'm probably going to set a schedule that's after the backup process is complete on the production side. And then this will pick up maybe nightly. And so I created one tech field day here, and I can essentially just edit it. And in this case, I already put in the right information, but I have, I just tell it what to do. I define the policy, that's the one we had created. And this will just tell me, I want to run this analyze job we just talked about, okay, that goes through the motion of, mount it, call, do the REST API call, do the scan. When you find something, either way, push it back into the dashboard. Actually, only when you find something that's bad, it will, because it's an exceptions dashboard. Send the details out to a mail server so you can inspect the detailed report. I can tell it how often, every 12 hours I said, and then I set basically a schedule. I'd set it for today. It should start at midnight, and then off we go.
And this analysis, is this where the ML is? Like, where's the?
That's the ML.
Okay,
So-
and we'll hear about that.
And you're going to hear about that, what
Okay.
they do. So it's essentially teaching the algorithms to keep up to date.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, if you wanted to apply the concepts of ML and, or anything of that nature in the vault, it's restrictive. You need the connectivity.
Yeah.
So Jim will talk about that. Copies, so what I would do then is, look, you can see here, good. So this is basically a verdict. All it said that in this M tree, I didn't find anything unusual. That's not a guarantee. It's possible, maybe not Petya in there, but it's a pretty good sort of indicator that anything that Petya would trigger, right, in terms of encryption and so forth, we can rule out with a greater degree of certainty than doing nothing. That's the idea. Because if this says critical, then at least it might trigger the next set of actions to take a closer look. So it's really just a tool to make this process a little bit more proactive and a little bit more efficient. So this one wasn't scanned. So this is, again, my M-tree copy from, and I would say analyze. This is what I can schedule, but I'm just going to do it here. And, I select the app. You can specify the data format, but Jim will talk about it. It is inherently aware of the types of backup formats and so forth. I hit apply, and then essentially I can follow along, and you can see this job is running as well. Because this is already done. I terminated that, you saw that. So the next one that's working right now is the analyze job, and it's running fairly quickly, but it's going to take a while to finish. And then likely, knock on wood, it's going to find something that's benign, and that's good. So in theory, you can do this basically every copy you take in, and you get a basic verdict, right, or an alert. But let's see what else. And then we have the recovery. So, I had these retention lock copies. Here they are. If I wanted to go about creating a recovery sandbox, so then I can start the recovery of my infrastructure, maybe my backup server, and then the data recovery. This is where I start. The first thing I need to do is essentially create a sandbox, right? Mount it, and then I would do the things I need to do to get to a browsable backup catalog, and then do the data recovery from there. Okay? I can give it a name, and then I can mount it, and then I hit apply, and then it basically would go through the motion, and then that's where I would then pick up to do a normal DR procedure that I would do regardless of what backup software you're using. Or if you're not using a backup software, then you're essentially skipping that step of having to reinstate the personality of the backup or the data mover software, right? Those are the two options. And then we basically have, the administration. I think I told you that. So this is already added. So some names, Stephen would be added here. I can do it now. I can disable users. And then essentially I can specify what I want specific users to receive in terms of alerts. So this would then basically tap into that email mechanism that says, I want you to basically get the batch of all the alerts or just receive critical alerts. You can specify, do I want noisy or do I just want to know when something's bad and then I can intervene. Right? Back to jobs, so that's still running. And once it's done, it will either say good or critical. If this turns out to be a critical, then I will see this critical in the security tab, because that's why we parse those out. System-related alerts have a different, weighting, if you will, than security-related ones. That will increment up to 1. And it's just a little slow right now. There it is, due to the network, right? And that's really the product that we wanted to kind of take you through. All of these things can be done via CLI. It probably doesn't demo as well. And then, clearly you have a little bit more of a feel also for our data protection strategy when it comes to sort of the user experience in general. Right? That's basically what I had. Let's see here.
You get about 10 minutes.
From the practical implementation side, you're saying that you've got your stuff that you run with the Docker containers. Is that part of a general package, or do you have like a, cringe to say this, but do you have a converged version of this where I can buy my rack, which comes with my new data domain, my VX
Oh, you want an
rail?
appliance kind of thing? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, here's my vault, and perhaps comes in a big safe with bigger locks than my usual rack does.
And a wheel to turn.
Yeah,
No, I would
exactly.
love that. I think this you raise a very good point, right? Those are the two sort of consumption models we see, which is either SaaS-based, so you basically meter it and then you just tap into the capability, or an appliance that would really help then also accelerate velocity even more. Right now, the answer is no, but what we wanted to do is get away from sort of these individual projects, highly customized, to something that's repeatable, standardized, and yes, of course, you can customize around it. And so the implementation or the installation of the software itself, even when we did the alpha, took 15 minutes.
Yeah.
This is not a big deal. But you're right. I mean, there's the other considerations. When you have an appliance, I mean, of course, the benefit is you can just have it factory hardened. You don't have to do that there. That would be like an immediate, and then the TCE benefits is obvious.
Is right there.
Right?
Well,
So I
I'm
wouldn't be
especially thinking-
surprised if we're looking at that, but yeah.
Because logically, this kind of solution is right in the heart of your target market of people that are buying VxRail and those kinds of appliances that are dealing with that kind of rack scale infrastructure. Anyone in the SMB market is not going to be going down this route. This is, number one, probably overkill
Yeah.
and too complicated for what they're looking for. So like the guys you're selling into are the guys that are already buying converged stacks, pre-prepared, pre-configured. So this would just be for them another SKU. Just go, oh, there's our vault
There's the cyber recovery
Yeah.
type
box.
data
and
protection appliance.
That's right. Okay.